Over the last few years of this new era of prototype racing, the flagship classes of the WEC and IMSA have produced some epic competition across each of the events, and that is mainly due to the regulations that are present in both championships. But what exactly are the regulations of LMH and LMDh? What are the differences between them, and why do they attract so much attention to endurance racing competition? Well, those details are exactly what I'll break down in this video, as this is LMH and LMDh fully explained. First off, I want to answer one of the biggest questions out there, and that is, what exactly are the differences between these two rule sets? Let's start off with LMH. LMH stands for Le Mans Hypercar, and it is the regulation for high-performance and technologically advanced prototype cars built by car manufacturers. The regulations of LMH, which are also referred to as the hypercar regulations, were created by the ACO and FIA to be the successor to the LMP1 regulations, which ran in the WEC and Le Mans up until the year of 2020. The Le Mans hypercar rule set allows the manufacturer to have more freedom when building their hypercar. Car manufacturers have the option to supply their own chassis, bodywork, engine, gearbox, and more. Car manufacturers also have a choice of using a hybrid system or not. For example, Toyota's hypercar uses a hybrid component along with an internal combustion engine, where the boutique brand Glickenhaus chose not to use a hybrid. The LMH regulations also allow the hybrid component to be at the front of the car, with the internal combustion engine being at the back, which allows the LMH cars to be four-wheel drive, which can be beneficial in certain circumstances, and this is different to the LMDh regulations, which I'll explain in a moment. Although, it's key to remember that not all Le Mans hypercars are four-wheel drive. For example, the small boutique brand Vanwall doesn't have a hybrid component, and so their car is only rear-wheel drive. LMH cars have a max power output of 500 kilowatts, or 670 horsepower, with a minimum weight limit of 1,030 kilograms, or 2,270 pounds. However, the cars will be affected on a race-by-race basis by the championship's balance to performance rule set, so the performance of the cars could definitely fluctuate depending on the BOP. It's also very important to remember that the LMH cars can be derived from a road variant of the manufacturer's hypercar. For example, Aston Martin's entry is derived from the pre-existing road variant of their Valkyrie hypercar model. The LMH cars made their debut in 2021 at the WEC season opener of the 6 Hours of Spa, but only 2 LMH cars entered, and those were from the Japanese constructor Toyota. The only other car that was entered into the WEC's new top class was the Alpine A480, but this entry was not under the Le Mans hypercar regulations. Since then though, many more manufacturers have joined, as I'll explain in just a bit, and the LMH cars have continued to race for many years. Moving on to LMDh, which, like LMH, is also a regulation for high-performance and technologically advanced prototype cars built by car manufacturers. LMDh stands for Le Mans Daytona H, and this regulation differs from the LMH cars in many ways. The LMDh regulations were created by the ACO and IMSA to be the successor from the DPI regulations, which were a set of rules for high-performance prototypes competing in IMSA exclusively, at events like the Rolex 24 Daytona and the 12 Hours of Sebring from 2017 till 2022. Car manufacturers building LMDh cars will be supplied with a gearbox from X-Track, an MGU from Bosch, batteries from WAE Technologies, and unlike the LMH cars, the LMDh entries will have to use a chassis supplied by one of 4 brands, and they'll all be next generation LMP2 chassis. Manufacturers have to pick one of the following chassis suppliers, including Multimatic, Dallara, Orica, and finally Ligier. So far, at least one kind of car on the grid is using a chassis from one of these suppliers. As for the hybrid component, unlike LMH brands which have a choice to pick between using one or not, a hybrid system is mandatory in an LMDh car, and it's placed at the back, which results in all LMDh prototypes being rear-wheel drive, where, as I explained beforehand, LMH cars can be four-wheel drive. Like for the other rule set, the bodywork for LMDh cars is all up to the manufacturer, and they can use styling techniques that make their cars recognizably similar to the brand's production road models. The LMDh models have the same weight limits and power outputs as the LMH cars, and can also be affected by the championship's balance of performance system. Also, remember when I mentioned that LMH cars can be derived from road versions of hypercars? Well, LMDh cars can't. That's exclusively for the Le Mans hypercar regulations. Where the LMH cars started racing in 2021, the LMDh entries didn't start racing until 2023, with the car's first race coming in IMSA at the prestigious Rolex 24 at Daytona event, and that race was won by Meyer-Shank Racing's brand new Acura entry. So now that I've gone over the regulations of LMH and LMDh, I now want to point out that one of the reasons why these rule sets are so successful is that the LMH and LMDh cars can race together in the same championship, which definitely wasn't the case for the previous generation of prototypes, as the DPI cars were strictly racing in IMSA, where in the final years of their existence, the LMP1 cars were only racing in the World Endurance Championship. That's truly one of the neat things about LMH and LMDh, because the cars can compete in the Global Series of the World Endurance Championship and in the North American Series of the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. For now though, these regulations are only present in those two series, and have not expanded into other championships, like the Asian Le Mans or European Le Mans series for example. The LMH and LMDh cars are also significantly cheaper to build and enter compared to the previous prototype generation of LMP1, which gives a better opportunity for more brands to enter. However, the more recent LMP1 cars are considered to be faster than these new models. In recent years, at events like the 24 Hours of Le Mans, we have seen record-sized grids, and that has therefore brought many more people to venues, with the most recent Le Mans to date in 2024 featuring a total of 329,000 spectators attending the historic French endurance race. And if we look at the final year of LMP1 in 2020 at the event, just 2 cars were entered by a brand, and just 4 years later in 2024, 23 entries were set to go racing, and all were entered by car manufacturers to try and challenge for overall victory. Although it's not just the competitiveness of these regulations that gain the attention from viewers across the world, as the differences in aerodynamic design and sound are a contributing factor. For example, I've been attending IMSA's Motocorsa de Monterrey event in person at Laguna Seca over the last few years, and when the LMDh cars go by, you don't even need to look at them to know what cars they are, because you can tell that the roaring V8 powered car that would fly by would be a Cadillac, or the unique sounding downshifts were recognizable of that of a Porsche. And that just proves that LMH and LMDh are a major success, with the diversity in cars competing being a factor. Something else I wanted to point out was that for a short while there were false claims on the internet that the Le Mans hypercars couldn't compete in IMSA, but that's totally not the case, as proven by Aston Martin's Valkyrie, which is becoming the first car to race in IMSA using the LMH regulations. For the categories that these cars will race in the WEC, the entries will compete in the hypercar class, where in IMSA they will race in the Grand Touring Prototype category, which is abbreviated as the GTP class. I also want to mention that IMSA's prototype class is technically going through its second iteration, as the GTP name was brought back for these new sets of rules, as the original GTP class was during the golden age of sports car endurance racing, during the 1980s and early 90s, when the iconic Group C cars raced in GTP from 1981 until 1993. Unlike the rule sets, there aren't that many differences in the categories. The main difference between Hypercar and GTP is the balance of performance, because the Hypercar class runs under the WEC BOP system, and of course the GTP class runs under the IMSA BOP system. IMSA does, however, have a rule that manufacturers competing in GTP have to sell at least 2,500 road cars a year to compete in the category. This rule does not affect the WEC, but that championship has their own rule which is different from IMSA. The Hypercar rule states that all factory-supported entries must run 2 cars full-time, and by the way, that does not include privateer entries like Proton Competitions Porsche or the privateer AF Corsa Ferrari. Back to the regulations themselves, and one point that I want to mention is how long these regulations will actually be present in motorsports. We don't know for a fact how long they'll go, but we do know that the LMH and LMDh cars will be racing at least until the end of the 2020s. As following the major success of the regulations, they were extended by the organizers till at least 2029. So we do know for a fact that we will see these kinds of cars racing out on track for many years to come. Now, the success of the LMH and LMDh regulations, which has led to some calling this the platinum era of endurance racing, is definitely thanks to the wide-ranging participation of many prestigious manufacturers from all over the globe, the likes we haven't seen since the Group C era. Since being established, the LMH and LMDh rule sets have attracted 14 car manufacturers that have produced or will produce cars to compete in either the WEC or an IMSA, and there are bound to be more brands entering in the future. As for the manufacturers and cars participating, let's first take a look at LMH. For the Le Mans Hypercar regulations, we have 7 manufacturers that have committed, which includes Toyota with their car being called the GR010 Hybrid, Ferrari with their 499P, Peugeot who have brought their 9X8 Hypercar, which initially had no rear wing. Then there's the first of the boutique brands, Glickenhaus, who raced their SCG007 from 2021 to 2023. Next, there's Aston Martin, who's bringing the highly anticipated V12-powered Valkyrie AMR LMH into racing competition in 2025. Then there's Isotta Fraschini, as in 2024, the now revived company entered their Tipo 6 LMH Competizione into the World Endurance Championship exclusively. And finally, for the LMH brands, there's Vanwall, who brought their non-hybrid Van der Waals 680 LMH into the WEC for 2023. Moving on to LMDh, which features 7 manufacturers that have committed to the rule set. And first up on the list is Porsche, who bring their 963 prototype to both the WEC and IMSA. Then there's Cadillac with their incredible sounding V8 powered V-Series R. Then Acura, who only competes in IMSA and races their ARX06. Next is BMW, who competes with the M-Hybrid V8 machine across both championships, Alpine, who only competes in the WEC and brings their A424 LMDh car. Lamborghini is next on the list, who races their SC63 in IMSA exclusively. And finally, there's Genesis, who have committed to the LMDh regulations for 2026 and beyond, and they'll be bringing the GMR 001. So that completes all the details that you need to know regarding the regulations of LMH and LMDh. What are your thoughts regarding these rule sets for the WEC and IMSA? Is it a major success? Well, let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like endurance racing, definitely subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because I'm releasing videos on a weekly basis regarding the WEC, IMSA, Intercontinental GT, and much more. To watch more content now, check out these suggested videos I've put on screen. For now though, that's all from me. Thanks for watching.